Hypothesis testing. The goal of a hypothesis test is to check or test the validity of a certain claim. This means someone claims something and we want to check to see if this claim is valid. And we will use statistical procedure to check such claim. In a formal process, there are four main steps. The first step in a hypothesis testing is to state the claims. This includes the null hypothesis, which we usually denote H sub 0, and the alternative hypothesis, which we denoted H sub A. The null hypothesis is the statement of indifference, so it's always have the equal sign. The alternative hypothesis can be either the left tail, the right tail, or the two tail. Once we formulate the claims, we move on to the next step where we choose the sample and collect the data. When we collect the data, we will need to summarize the data. We summarize the data by computing the mean or the proportion or the standard deviations of the samples. And so we can only compute the information from the sample. And one way to summarize the data is to compute the test statistics. And before we compute the test statistics, we will need to check the condition, whether it is valid, whether it is okay to use such procedure. The test statistic can be either Z or T value. These are what we call the critical value. For the proportion or the mean when the sigma or when the standard deviation of the population is known, we would compute the test statistic Z. And for the test about the mean when the standard deviation of the population is unknown, we would use the T test statistics. We then move on to assess the evidence by computing the p-value. The p-value is the probability to obtain the data as extreme as the one we observed, assuming that the null hypothesis is true. It is very important that we formulate the proper hypothesis when we proceed to collect the data, to summarize the data, and to find the p-value. Once we compute the p-value using the test statistics that we computed in the previous step, we would compare the p-value to what we call the significance level alpha. The significance level, think of it as the criteria or the cutoff value. Usually, we would use the significance level alpha equals 0.05 unless stated otherwise. And the final step is to make conclusions. An analogy to the hypothesis test is a court trial. Usually at the conclusion of the trial, they would not say, we find the defendant innocent. They would say, we find the defendant not guilty, or we find the defendant guilty. And so in this case, we either reject the null hypothesis or we fail to reject the null hypothesis. And so the hypothesis testing is the test against the null hypothesis. At first, we assume that the null hypothesis is true, and we find evidence to either reject or fail to reject the null hypothesis. That doesn't mean that the alternative hypothesis is not important. Once we know whether we reject or fail to reject the null hypothesis, we can make proper conclusions for the alternative hypothesis as well. For instance, if we reject the null hypothesis, then we would informally accept the alternative. And if we fail to reject the null hypothesis, meaning we've informally accepted, then we would have to reject the alternative hypothesis.